For 40 years, Thomas Darby had stood in the shadows of Aberton Hall, polishing silver and pouring tea for his enigmatic master. Now, in a single moment, he stood to own it all. The day Sir Reginald Fairfax died, Thomas bowed his head as pallbearers carried the coffin down the grand staircase. He had lost the man he dutifully served since youth. Yet as the funeral gave way to the reading of the will in the study, Thomas was about to receive the shock of his life. The family solicitor cleared his throat. Relatives perched on velvet chairs, their eyes flicking between the lawyer and Thomas at the back of the room. In a quavering voice, the solicitor read Sir Reginald's will. The billionaire's entire estate, his sprawling mansion, investments, art collection, would go to a single beneficiary. Not the estranged nephew scowling, not a distant cousin or charity, but Thomas, the faithful servant who had devoted his life to Sir Reginald. A stunned silence fell. Thomas felt his heart pound against his ribs. The keys of Aberton Hall jingled softly in his pocket, suddenly heavier than ever. He was no longer just the butler. He was now master of the house, heir to a legacy of secrets and unimaginable wealth. Why would a reclusive billionaire leave everything to his butler? What hidden truth lay behind this extraordinary bequest? Would you embrace such a shocking inheritance or fear it? Thomas stood alone in the great hall long after the stunned murmurs from the will reading had faded. In his trembling hands was the will itself, its heavy parchment spelling out the inheritance now resting on his shoulders. Evening light slanted through the high windows, and he realized that just this morning he had been a simple butler polishing the marble floor. By nightfall, he was master of the estate. He traced his own name on the parchment, hardly believing it, his heart filled with equal parts gratitude and dread. Why him? What had he ever done to deserve such absolute trust, or such a burden? That night, sleep escaped Thomas. He wandered the dim corridors of Aberton Hall by lantern light, having traded his starched uniform for a simple nightcoat. The mansion was eerily quiet, without the familiar routines of service to occupy him. Every portrait, every antique vase and carved oak door held a piece of his life. As a teenager in the 1970s, Thomas had first come to this house as an eager junior footman. He remembered those early days, rising before dawn to polish silver, learning the proper way to address lords and ladies at dinner, and studying the habits of the man he served. Sir Reginald Fairfax was middle-aged then, a wealthy, inscrutable figure who kept most people at arm's length. The reclusive billionaire commanded both respect and fear in business circles, but at home he lived in quiet solitude. And Thomas, an orphaned boy grateful for a roof over his head, quickly learned that loyalty and discretion were paramount. Over the decades, Thomas grew from a shy hall boy into the steadfast head butler. He served at lavish banquets when Sir Reginald occasionally entertained nobles and tycoons under the chandelier's glow. He also tiptoed through many midnight halls when the old man paced the library alone, nursing a glass of brandy and unspoken regrets. Thomas had glimpsed his master's sorrows, a stray tear here, a heavy sigh there, but he never pried and never repeated a word. For all his wealth, Sir Reginald had no wife and, as far as anyone knew, no children. The only family Thomas knew of was a nephew, Charles Fairfax, who rarely visited except to badger his uncle for money. One winter night, a fierce storm knocked out the electricity. In the darkness, Sir Reginald unexpectedly opened up to Thomas by the light of a single oil lamp. He spoke haltingly of a youthful love lost to heartbreak, a regret that had haunted him ever since. Thomas quietly promised he would always remain by Sir Reginald's side, as steadfast as the walls of Aberton Hall. The old man said nothing, simply patting Thomas's shoulder in a rare show of gratitude. In that moment, Thomas realized that beneath Sir Reginald's stern exterior lay a deep, unspoken sorrow. Thomas never imagined he would receive anything beyond a modest pension and perhaps a small cottage on the estate when his service ended. The idea that he might inherit the very place he maintained was beyond his wildest dreams. After all, such a gift could just as easily be a curse. Sure enough, by the next morning, gossip was already swirling among the staff and in the village. Many whispered that Thomas must have manipulated his master, or that Sir Reginald had lost his wits in his final days. Thomas knew outsiders would never accept that a humble butler could truly inherit a billionaire's fortune purely out of loyalty and trust. He folded the will and tucked it safely inside his coat. There was work to do. Ironically, in a life where he no longer had any obligation to work. But Thomas's sense of duty was ingrained. Master of the house or not, at sunrise he made his way to the kitchen to brew a pot of Earl Grey tea, just as he had every morning for decades. Only now, the head chair at the dining table sat empty. Thomas felt a pang as he realized he even missed hearing Sir Reginald's sharp voice requesting his morning tea. In that quiet kitchen, he understood that money and titles meant little without someone to serve or a purpose to fulfill. For 40 years, his purpose had been serving Sir Reginald. Who was he now, if not a butler? As he stood lost in thought, a crunch of tires on the gravel drive broke the dawn silence. Through the window, Thomas saw a dark sedan coming up the drive. The sun had barely risen, yet it seemed trouble was already on its way. Thomas straightened his posture, nerves on edge. Despite everything, he was still prepared to greet any visitor properly. But the figure that emerged from the car was no mere visitor. It was Charles Fairfax, face flushed with anger, striding toward the entrance with two unsmiling men in suits. The nephew had returned, and by the fiery determination in Charles's eyes, Thomas could tell that the battle for Aberton Hall was only just beginning. Thomas opened the heavy front door just as Charles Fairfax reached the top step. The morning light slanted harshly across the foyer as the butler turned master inclined his head in a courteous greeting. "Charles," he said quietly, but the younger man brushed past him without so much as a nod. Charles's two stone-faced associates trailed behind, carrying briefcases. In the drawing room, Charles spun on his heel to face Thomas. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a slight tremor in his clenched jaw. "I'll get straight to the point," he snarled, tossing a folded document onto the coffee table. "This will is a fraud." Thomas felt a chill as he recognized the document's seal, a formal notice of legal contestation. "Mr. Fairfax," he began calmly, "I assure you, I was as shocked as anyone. Spare me your act," Charles snapped, voice rising. He took a step forward, jabbing a finger toward Thomas's chest. "You think I don't know what's going on? You poisoned his mind against his own family. An old man, confused on his deathbed. Of course he'd sign anything put in front of him." Thomas swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain respectful. "Sir Reginald was of sound mind, Charles. He knew exactly what he wanted. I never asked for any of this." Charles let out a bitter laugh. "Never asked? How convenient that the servant who catered to his every whim ends up with a billionaire's fortune." He leaned in close, lowering his voice to a vicious hiss. "Mark my words, I will see this overturned. I've already hired the best lawyers in London." Behind Charles, one of the suited men cleared his throat softly. "Our firm has filed an injunction to freeze the estate's assets until the matter is resolved," the lawyer said, his tone measured. "Mr. Fairfax contends that Sir Reginald was unduly influenced. We intend to prove as much in court." Thomas's hands balled into fists at his sides, hidden just out of sight. Undue influence? In all his years, he had never once betrayed Sir Reginald's trust or manipulated him. The accusation stung deeply. "I cared for him like a father," Thomas said, his voice low and controlled. "Until his final day, I honored his wishes. The will reflects those wishes." Charles's face twitched with anger. "He was my flesh and blood, not yours," he spat. "Whatever hold you had on him, I'll break it. That estate should have been mine." He swept an arm in a furious gesture, knocking over a delicate china teacup that had been set on a sideboard. The porcelain shattered on the floor. Thomas flinched at the sudden crash, the instinct to fetch a broom flickering through him absurdly at a time like this. "Charles, please," Thomas implored, taking a step back and gesturing for calm.
Sir Reginald made his decision. Fighting it will only drag on this pain for everyone.
But Charles would not be soothed. He loomed closer, a sneer curling his lips. Did you think you could just step into his shoes? You're nothing but the help. His words dripped with disdain. You probably think this is some fairy tale where the butler turns into a lord. Well, it's not. I'll see you in court, old man. I have witnesses who'll swear you manipulated him. Don't forget, I was supposed to inherit everything before you slithered in. Thomas stood his ground, though his heart was hammering. If Sir Reginald wanted you to have his estate, he would have left it to you. The statement hung in the air, and for a moment Charles's glare faltered, revealing a hint of hurt behind his rage. My uncle was a stubborn fool at the end, Charles said, seething through his teeth. And you must have filled his head with lies. He turned sharply to the lawyer. We're done here. The legal men snapped their briefcases shut. Charles fixed Thomas with one last withering stare. Enjoy playing the gentleman of the house while you can, he said coldly. It won't last. With that, he strode out, his entourage following. The echo of the front door slamming reverberated through the hall. Thomas exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For a long moment, he stood amid the silence, staring at the shattered china on the floor. Charles's venomous words still rang in his ears, their bitterness lingering in the empty room. A soft cough made Thomas look up. Mr. Pembroke, Sir Reginald's solicitor, stood in the doorway holding a black-edged envelope. Sir Reginald wanted you to have this, he said gently, extending it towards Thomas. The butler recognized his master's bold handwriting on the front. To Thomas Darby, to be opened upon my passing. Thomas accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. Pembroke gave a sympathetic nod. He had great faith in you, Thomas. I expect this letter will explain everything. With that, the lawyer quietly excused himself, leaving Thomas alone in the empty room. Thomas climbed the stairs to Sir Reginald's study, heart pounding. In the hush of that familiar room, he lowered himself into the leather chair behind the mahogany desk. With a deep breath, he broke the wax seal on the envelope. If you're captivated by this mystery, now's the perfect moment to hit subscribe and join us for the rest of the story. Thomas unfolded the letter and began to read its contents. His eyes moved over the neat handwriting of the man he had served a lifetime. At first, his vision blurred with tears that he blinked back before continuing. Sir Reginald's voice seemed to speak in his mind as he read. My dear Thomas, the letter read. If you are reading this, I have left this world and entrusted my home and legacy to you. You must be confused, and perhaps angry, about my decision. I owe you the explanation I never had the courage to give in life. For 40 years you stood by me as a loyal servant and the truest friend. In truth, you became the son I never acknowledged. You deserve to know that you are my blood. Your mother, Elizabeth, was the love of my life, but society's rules kept us apart. She bore you in secret, and I only learned of your existence after she passed away. Forgive me for fearing the scandal and never claiming you openly. Instead, I brought you into my household so I could be near you in the only way I knew how. I was a coward for not telling you all this face to face. In the end, leaving you my estate is my attempt to give you what was always yours by right, and to beg your forgiveness. Know that I have always been proud of you. You were more than a butler to me. You were my son and my greatest success in life. Please remember that. With love and remorse, Reginald. By the time he finished reading, Thomas's hands were covering his face, and hot tears slipped through his fingers. The revelation was at once tragic and precious. He slowly lowered his hands and raised his gaze to the faded portrait of Sir Reginald on the wall. Father, he whispered, the word strange and bittersweet on his tongue. He let out a long, unsteady breath, trying to steady the storm inside him. Outside the study's windows, a bird chirped lightly, oblivious to the turn his world had just taken. Inside, Thomas Darby, born a servant, now a master, realized he had been something far more all along: family. A week later, at the official hearing to contest the will, Thomas maintained a quiet dignity as lawyers argued beneath the vaulted ceiling and gilded sconces of the court. The air was thick with expectation as they debated Sir Reginald's state of mind. He gave sincere testimony about his decades of service and the clarity his master held until the very end. Thomas's steady humility and evident devotion made a strong impression. When Charles's barrister smugly noted how convenient it was that a servant should suddenly inherit a fortune, Thomas's voice trembled only slightly as he replied, "I would give every last pound back to have Sir Reginald alive and well again." The heartfelt declaration left the panel in momentary silence. At last, Thomas decided to share the secret that would resolve everything. With the judge's permission, he produced the sealed letter Sir Reginald had left him and read aloud the pivotal line. "For 40 years, you stood by me. You became the son I never acknowledged. You are my blood." A collective gasp rose in the chamber. Charles stood up in shock, his face drained of color. In that moment, the truth that had been hidden for a lifetime was laid bare for all to see. Confronted with undeniable proof of Sir Reginald's wishes, Charles had no fight left in him. Stunned and trembling, he withdrew his challenge on the spot, without another word. As he gathered his papers to leave, Thomas stepped forward and said quietly, "I'm sorry it came to this, Charles." It was a genuine olive branch, not a gloat. Charles hesitated, then gave a curt nod before hurrying out, his earlier fury replaced by hollow defeat. Thomas watched him go, feeling a twinge of pity, but he also felt relief flood through him. The truth had prevailed, and Sir Reginald's wishes and memory were safe from ruin. Later that day, Thomas stepped out of the courthouse with a profound sense of peace. A great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Not only had the legal battle been won, but his father's honor had been upheld. In the days that followed, news of Sir Reginald's secret son spread through both high society and humble village lanes. Some were scandalized that the reclusive billionaire had an heir living under his own roof in disguise. But most who heard the tale found it oddly fitting, a story of loyalty rewarded in the most extraordinary way. The tabloids dubbed Thomas the butler who inherited $1 billion. But those close to Aberton Hall knew him now as a rightful heir who had earned his inheritance through a lifetime of devotion. Under Thomas's gentle stewardship, the estate truly became his home at last, thriving with new warmth. He remained humble even in great wealth, often rising early to brew his own pot of Earl Grey tea out of habit, much to the fond amusement of the staff. The once quiet manor now saw laughter and life return to its halls. He made sure the loyal staff were generously provided for, and even established a charitable foundation in Sir Reginald's name. The great fortune, once locked away in solitude, became a force for good in the community, a legacy both Thomas and his father could be proud of. One crisp afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the manor's tall windows, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the still air, Thomas paused in front of Sir Reginald's portrait in the great hall. For years he had polished that very frame as part of his duties, never imagining he was tending to the likeness of his own father. Now he gazed up at the familiar face with a gentle smile. He felt no bitterness for the years of secrecy, only gratitude for the truth and love that had finally come to light. "Rest well, Father," Thomas whispered softly. "I hope I've made you proud." In the stillness, it seemed as if the painted eyes looking back caught a new sparkle in the light. Thomas turned and continued down the hall, his footsteps sure and heart at peace. He had spent 40 years in service, but now he would live the rest of his days as both heir and son, determined to honor the memory of the man who, in the end, had trusted him with everything. With that thought, Thomas lifted a small brass servant's bell, the very one he had answered dutifully for so many years, and gave it a gentle ring. The cheerful chime echoed down the corridors, calling the household together. It was time for afternoon tea, a new tradition under Thomas's roof, where master and staff would gather as friends. As he listened to the pleasant stir of footsteps and warm voices approaching, Thomas smiled. Abberton Hall was filled with life and fellowship at last, just as Sir Reginald would have wanted. What do you think of Thomas's remarkable and heartwarming journey from butler to billionaire heir? Did his loyalty truly earn him such a life-changing legacy? And would you have forgiven Charles if you were in Thomas's place? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.